Record. All right, and let's open up our waiting room and get started. Good morning, probably good afternoon if you're not Central Time. Um, it's good to see everyone joining. I'm watching our waiting room. I'm Nan. I work with ACHE. I help out with the virtual events. So I am here if you need any help with your technology or have any questions. That chat is available for you to use. And in fact, why don't you go ahead and click on the chat and let us know where you're joining us from? Get it started. I'm sure many are from Indiana since this is being sponsored on behalf of the ACHE of Indiana, but sometimes we get people from a lot farther away. It's always neat to see where you're joining us from. Again, I'm Nan. I will be here for the duration of this event. You can reach out to me at any time. Good. I see people answering. Thanks so much, everybody. Got a Kentucky, Pennsylvania. So that's awesome. Um, Before we begin, just a few housekeeping things. We are recording. That is, so you can watch this again if you'd like. It will be available in about 2 business days where you went and registered for your course. You can find a button, it'll say view recording, and you can go ahead and watch this if you'd like to see anything or listen to anything again. Also, very important is the session is worth 1.5 hours of that ACHE virtual interactive education credit. To earn the credit, please stay on for the duration of the event until we close it out. Make sure that your name matches how you registered. And if you have trouble with the name not matching, if you're on a different Zoom account and you need your name to be different, let me know. I can help you with that as well. Evaluation form, you will see a link in the chat every so often with a evaluation form. That form is one that we really ask you to complete. It's so important for us to get your feedback and insight on our programming. So when you see that, you can click on it. It will open another window. If you don't want to touch it until the end, you can copy and paste it, or I will at the very end go ahead and put that on there and stay on the event just to let people grab that. So don't worry about if you miss it, because as we get people chatting, things tend to move up and down in that chat box. Questions should go in the chat, comments. We will have time at the end to answer questions. So we really want you to put those in there as you're thinking of them so we can get to those. And that is, I believe, everything I wanted to let you all know. I'm going to go ahead and turn the event over to our chapter sponsor, Corey Josie, who's going to get us started. And thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining Navigating the Path to Healthcare Leadership. I would like to give a special thank you to the Master of Science in Healthcare Management program at IU Bloomington for sponsoring this virtual event today. On behalf of ACHE of Indiana, I would like to thank our sponsors, Blue & Co., HEPE, Cornerstone, Access Telecare, Arc Design, the Masters in Healthcare Management in Bloomington, Ascension St. Vincent, Hagerman, and Walden University. On behalf of ISHRA, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, Gregory and Appel, Capstone Leadership, and USI, as well as their silver sponsor, OC Tanner. For those of you who are ISHRA members, I just want to give a plug that this program is also eligible for SHRM credits. There's an activity ID there in the corner, and that will be sent out afterwards as well for you to claim those education credits. And it is my pleasure to hand things over to our moderator, April.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. So I am April Grudine. I am the Faculty Program Director for the Master of Science in Healthcare Management degree program at IU. I am also the founder of Strategy to Skills, a healthcare consulting company that does training and education for healthcare. And we have an amazing panel for you today. We're really excited to have a discussion around navigating what it means to be a leader in healthcare and how different people's journeys and lessons learned. Before I begin, I know that we have a variety of different people in the room today, so I would love to hear what you're interested in knowing today. So what would you like to walk away with? What burning questions do you have? I want to make sure that we're addressing your immediate needs as part of the panel. So if you can drop in the chat for me real quick, just what you're interested in learning about. I want to make sure that we hit it as we're going through our questions, and I will look at those as we are moving forward. So let's see, what are you here to learn? What's interesting to you? I see a couple people I know. Hello, friends. As we are waiting for people to interested in career journeys, thank you, Max. What else? What you here to learn about? What would be interesting to know or to discuss? What could help you in your daily work? As we are waiting for those to come in, I'm going to go ahead and kick off with an introduction of our panel. So we have multiple people here that have amazing journeys. So we'll kick off with our first question. For the panel, could you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your healthcare journeys? What was a key turning point? Maybe what helped you succeed? What challenges did you overcome? Give us a good introduction of who you are and how you got to where you're at.
April, do you want us to just jump in there?
Rosalind, why don't you start for us?
Okay, awesome. My name is Rosalind Mark. I'm Director of Operational Excellence at IU Health Medical Group, and happy to answer this question. I think a key turning point for me was when I was working on the rehab unit at the IU Health. I wanted to gain a better understanding of the business side of the operation. So I moved into a role that would help me do that. And while I was in that role, I observed some opportunities to improve our competitiveness, our reimbursement, and decrease the dollars that were being left on the table due to coding and documentation. And so I began to launch some improvement initiatives, and my leader recognized the work that I was doing and connected me with the Office of Transformation, which is now the Office of Operational Excellence. And when I was in that space, some opportunities became available for me to facilitate some really impactful work, to work with leaders and executives. And I think those opportunities led to the role that I currently have now as Director of Operational Excellence. So what helped me to succeed in my transition or the work that I've done, I think three things. I had a really great leader when I transitioned to the Office of Operational Excellence. I had a leader that trusted me. I had a leader that allowed me autonomy, a leader that provided a safe space for me and saw my potential and really challenged me. And I think that was key. And then personally, I embraced the opportunity for change. So I began to understand what it took to succeed. I had a learner's mindset, just listening, observing, seeking to understand, trying to become an expert in my area, doing my homework, and just staying focused on the needs of the customer. And then the last thing I think that helped me succeed is building networks. And I can't say enough about that. So just building networks and key partnerships are key. So those partnerships have helped me learn from other people. It's really helped me gain an understanding of the various roles and functions within the organization and how those functions intersect. And also it's provided an open door to opportunities. So I think those are the things that really have helped me succeed. And I think all of us have experienced some challenges and barriers. And I think one was my role that I took, the one I just mentioned about pivoting into leadership. It was a new role. So I had to help develop that role and define that role and really understand what the role could do for the organization. And it was a challenge, but learning Medicare and Medicaid rules and guidelines that were changing and staying on top of those things. The huge learning curve, I think, probably is a challenge for most of us in roles, right? So thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Natalie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your leadership journey?
Yeah, happy to. So my leadership journey is a little different. I'm kind of an early careerist, fresh leader. My background, I am a clinical dietitian. I just started my clinical nutrition supervisor position last December. So it's been a journey that I'm still learning and growing along the way, but just talking a little bit about my key turning point, my leadership journey. I started off as a clinical dietitian 3 years ago, straight out of graduation. I graduated from the Masters of Healthcare Management program at IU. And as soon as I actually began that position, I was in that mindset from MSHM, like I'm ready to lead, ready to be a leader, even though I'm entering this dietitian clinical provider role, right? And from the beginning, I made it clear to my manager that I wanted to lead. I wanted to become a transformational leader. My end goal was to be a supervisor, and she was very open to it. So, first of all, having a good leader, a good manager that gives you that opportunity and that autonomy that Rosalind was talking about really sparked my journey. So, in the beginning, my manager started to I participated in many projects. I was involved beyond patient care. I started to use all my skills that I've learned from my program, my internship, and I also started to be involved regionally. So I was part of a big regional subcommittee. It was called the Global Malnutrition Composite Score. I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but it's actually the first nutrition-focused electronic clinical quality measure that is developed and included in the centers for Medicare and Medicaid services. So it's a big ECQM that just launched, and our regional minister was interested to launch this for the whole system. Who was leading it? It was a regional manager, and I was part of that subcommittee, just as a member. And few weeks in, she resigned, and I did not want to stall that momentum that, it was a huge opportunity. So I volunteered and I said, I know I'm just a subcommittee member, a new dietitian, but I want to lead this huge committee. The director of clinical nutrition and wellness at the Trinity level was like, okay, I mean, show us what you have. I was very interested. So I volunteered to step up from that committee member to leading this huge project. I learned a lot, I learned a lot. First of all was listen first, build good relationships, know who your team is, trying to set clear expectations, know what is expected of me. And also had a lot of support, and mainly I had to stay humble. I had to stay very adaptable and had to practice humility, acknowledge that I don't know everything, but I'm going to learn as much as I can. Like you said, learning curve, and also just adjust as needed. And the biggest challenge I would say was the credibility. As a new, fresh graduate, new dietitian leading this big project, some peers, dietitians, leaders have been working longer than I have. So I invested extra time doing my research, my homework, and connecting with my team members, just, having them involved and showing them that I'm willing to learn and willing to lead this. And I'm happy to say we launched this. I worked with, multiple teams. We worked with informatics, IT. We actually implemented the malnutrition composite score into Epic. It was a huge success. So even though I was still new into this role, I kind of really showcased my talent, my skills, and what I had from what I learned in the program. And right now I'm actually building a Power BI dashboard for our quality team to track on malnutrition scores and how we're doing at our hospitals. So that was really the pivot, showing them what I can do and my potential. And then actually just last December I was promoted. So yeah.
Congratulations on your recent promotion, Natalie, and to you, Rosalind, as well. I think yours is a little older though. So thank you. Erin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your leadership journey? Any big challenges that may have come your way and how you overcame them?
Sure. So I am Erin Mullen. I am the Vice President of Human Resources at Putnam County Hospital. My healthcare career early on started in healthcare, and then I was there for a short stint working actually at Health South in HR, and I knew at that point that what I loved about healthcare was that it made an impact. Right, you really had a chance to make change and work directly impacting people. I went out of healthcare for a pretty long time, loved the work, but really got I came to the point where I was questioning, is what the work I'm doing, is it helping? Is it making an impact? I mean, I worked at Sears. We supported teams that fixed appliances. And while those were important, I thought, you know, my heart really is tied to people, right? Changing lives, impacting lives. So I'm back in healthcare now at Putnam County Hospital. And upon coming here, that's my journey back into it, right? The mission, right? Thinking, how do I define success each day? And who are my customers? And in this model, the customers are the people in the community. We're a community-based hospital. We're a rural access hospital. So our people, our customers are the people that I see at my kids' games, at Walmart. And so that was new because I had been remote for so long. So getting back into something where I have to face the people, right, that I am taking care of, that made it really important. So that was my journey back to the mission, right? Taking care of people that I live and work with, right, which I love. What helped was building trust. So I think any position you come into, the first thing you do is have to build those relationships. And so, you know, I never claim to be the expert in anything. There's always something I can learn. And so really putting myself in meetings to say, hey, tell me what you do, tell me how you do it. You're the expert, let me learn from you, and really just doing a lot of listening on the front end. The other piece was having people that give you real feedback, right? So how did I do? What do you think? Hey, I'm interested in this. What are your thoughts? That was really eye-opening to me because at that point I realized that even though I thought I was ready, there were people who looked at me and said, well, you're just HR, right? You're a leader, but you're just HR. And so how do you break out? And that is really, I think, was the big turning point for me to say, I'm not clinical. I have a strong HR background. I'm a leader, but how do I lead in healthcare? And how do I have a seat at the table that people respect? And so that led me back to looking at what education can I add? What can I do to build those credentials, to put confidence in people and have an answer to why am I at this? Why am I sitting here, right? What can I contribute? And I think that too is the challenge, right? Which I was up for. I still have a great mentor in my CEO who said, hey, you know, you got to go back to school. You have to go and you have to be able to come and add to the story. And so those pieces that I was missing, right, became my challenge, and the challenge to kind of break into that. So I'm still doing that, but it's going very well. And it's a great journey, but it was great advice.
Thank you, Erin. Let's finish up with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, can you introduce yourself to the room and tell us a little bit about your leadership journey?
Sure. Thanks, April. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. My name's Elizabeth Grimes, and I am the practice manager of orthopedics here at IU Health Fishers Hospital. My healthcare journey actually began on a pre-med track. Originally, I had thought that I was going to be a pediatrician or like an anesthesiologist. But what I quickly found through, taking healthcare administration courses and of course graduating from the MSHM program, as well as a study abroad experience in the UK and the Netherlands, is that I have the ability to drive data decision outcomes and at the end of the day, keep that patient-centered mind really at the forefront of health, any type of healthcare delivery that I do, whether I am clinical or non-clinical. And what I would say, helped me to succeed, as like these ladies have mentioned, is the relationships that I've built both within and outside of my day-to-day. Particularly now fostering those, dyad clinical to non-clinical partnerships with my medical director, fellow healthcare administrators, and proactively filling any types of gaps that I see now that I am more of that early careerist. To not only my mentors like Rosalind and Natalie shared, but sponsors who really saw my potential as an early careerist and created opportunities for me to thrive. And when I think about challenges, I recently completed my administrative fellowship also with IU Health. And I think that a challenge that a lot of folks face in this capacity is shifting from that learning focused role, being an administrative fellow under the tutelage of so many different healthcare executives, to one where I'm more directly responsible for outcomes. Really going from leading without a title to having one. But ultimately, what I've also learned is that your impact matters regardless of the role that you have within any type of a healthcare organization. As an example from my previous role, although I led without a title, I presented and delivered our environmental assessment that drove strategic outcomes across our entire organization and shaped our strategic plan going forward. And ultimately driving what we have focused on for years to come here at IU Health. So I think that, whether really whatever stage you are in your career, you can have an impact in any role and in any capacity that you have.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I hear a lot of common themes from across the panel, right? So I hear that being humble and being willing to ask thoughtful questions, to build trust with your teams, and that those relationships all around you are really important. I heard the theme of mission-driven work, right? And that the work that you're doing matters, it impacts your community, it fills your cup, and that we're being patient-centered regardless of we're doing relationships or that like those data analytics. I'm hearing getting involved, volunteering for new work and projects that might have been outside of what you normally would do. And that a good way to do that is to find mentors. So I've heard a lot about how powerful it is to have support from your leadership as well as mentors and key stakeholders around you to help you identify what those opportunities are to really help you shine, and just being open to learning those new skills. So as we're looking at, each of you are in very unique roles, right? So we've got HR, we've got OpEx, we've got clinical dietitian, and we have a practice manager. How did your background really shape your approach to leadership, right? Because we've got all kinds of different leadership frameworks and theories. How did your individual background shape how you show up in the space to take care of the patients and your teams? We'll go backwards and start with Elizabeth and then go back.
Awesome. What I would say has been at the forefront of my current role is, again, just acknowledging your active gap in being a non-clinical leader of clinical leaders. I think a lot of times there is that disconnect there where, your clinical team may say, okay, does someone that is not like an RN or an MA, et cetera, do they really get it, right? And I think that a way in which any healthcare administrator can be intentional in that way is taking the time to shadow all of your different clinical and non-clinical leaders. Be intentional with your rounding, not just swinging by and saying, hey, how's it going? Really taking the time to say, how can I help you to be successful? What barriers are you encountering? So I think that that's, I would say, the first component. And I think the second component as well is to, again, have that dyad partnership with your providers as well. I think that particularly with them, they see things in a different light that we may not see, right? Having that more traditional business background. And oftentimes there is more of that common ground than we initially think. So figuring out a way in which you can translate something that a provider may say into those spaces, and ultimately being an advocate on behalf of your clinical team, I think can help shape any types of challenges that you may be facing like in those particular roles. And I think that for me and my background as well, having that more human biology background, those skills do come into play still, even though I'm not in that traditional life sciences background, as I can relate to the, different processes or whatnot that like our clinical folks tend to interact with a little bit more. So, the things that you learn in your like educational careers, they do circle back eventually.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Erin, tell us about from an HR background, right? So I know that we've ACHE has recently partnered with some SHRM, is offering SHRM credits, and that HR is a really important part of healthcare. So how did your HR background, how did that impact how you show up as a leader, and what that means when you come to the table with your other C-suite leaders?
Sure. I think, the reason I went into human resources from the start was because I really like people, right? I have a heart for people. I'm a good communicator. And so this role, I think if you're you have a love for people, right, really translates into any business, but especially healthcare when you think about the mission. So, again, for our mission, it's serving the people in our community and making sure that that service is always exceptional. And so when I came back in to healthcare in this HR role, there was the gap of, hey, you're not clinical or you don't have these skills. And so for me, that was a personal challenge. But as far as leading teams, right, they need a navigator. You mentioned being an advocate, Elizabeth, that's so true. They don't need me to be the expert. I have experts. And so I think the key is really making sure that you continue to realize that, right? That you are tapping into those experts. They become your stakeholders, right? You're constantly checking in. Like you said, spending the time, having them be part of it. You're not delivering the plan. They are helping you build it and testing it out and going back and reflecting and making changes. And so, again, I'm, navigating, giving them air cover, supporting and letting them then be the experts. And that's really, I think, been key to me. So again, love for people brought me here. I think that translates into a leadership role and then really tapping into the experts, because there's no way, right? There's a lot of roles in our hospital. And even if I, had a clinical background, it doesn't mean that I'm the expert in every department. So that's been really important.
Thank you, Erin. And I really like that. And I think that can be one of the harder shifts of going from being one of the person that's used to doing to managing the team, is that you're used to having to be the expert in everything. And that shift in the mindset of recognizing that the other people in the area are experts and that your job is to pull them together and to provide them the space in which they can use their expertise to build something meaningful. So I really appreciate that. Let them be the experts, and your job is to remove barriers and to support them. Natalie, tell us a little bit about how your background as a clinician plays into your approach to leadership.
Of course. So, as a clinician, my primary job is to care for patients. Patient-centered care, I see them face to face. But even now in a leadership role, I would say that those experiences being a clinician shapes how I lead. I still carry a small patient load. I still try to see patients as much as I can because it keeps me connected to really what happens on the floor. I do my own like Gemba time. So I see how nutrition interventions are implemented. I spot opportunities to improve communication, whether it's with nurses, physicians, or the food service staff. I listen to my dietitian teams, their challenges, whether it's documentation load, coordination, any gaps in education that they need. Even and most of all, patient experience, like how are they doing? What's their experience while they're inpatient? Are they eating what's being ordered? Are they following interventions, recommendations? So I guess as a leader, now that I'm in that position where I have to review policies or new processes, I'm constantly asking myself, will this actually work in real life? So one of the things I've become known is for spotting those like bottlenecks. So whether it's an extra step in this documentation, especially now we transitioned from this huge system from Cerner to Epic, or, if there's a clunky consult process, I try to catch those early and I try to work with the team to find solutions and seeing what is, I guess, efficient and makes sense clinically as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Rosalind, tell me a little bit about how your background, because you also came from a clinical space, didn't you?
I did. I
Tell us
did.
about how that background, because you've got like two different, totally different careers there, right?
Yeah.
Like, tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about how that has come together to create your leadership approach.
Sure, sure. So my clinical and scientific backgrounds, I did some biomedical research once upon a time, and both my clinical and scientific backgrounds, I feel really have provided a framework that has influenced my approach to leadership. So from a clinical aspect, I consider myself an empathetic, compassionate, values driven collaborative leader. And I think being a clinician has helped shape that for me. So being patient focused as well as understanding from a clinical aspect the change fatigue and how to communicate with our frontline staff when you want to implement a change in a process. I understand what it means to be measured by productivity and to come in the door, try to see your patients, document, and get out of the door. And I understand how to communicate with clinicians as a result of that. So I think it has helped me to, keep that human element of the business front and center. Then from both a clinician and a scientific standpoint, that training that I got really helped me to focus on conducting assessments, establishing goals to address the gaps that I see, developing a plan, a treatment plan to move forward, and then collaborating with patients and caregivers and to develop an approach that's going to work, and then reevaluating that approach. And then if you think about the scientific method, it involves all of that, right? And so that's my approach to leadership. I'm always thinking about, assessing my current situation, what's happening, what's current, what do I need to do, what's my hypothesis, what experiment can I try, studying the results of that and then drawing conclusions. So that influences how I do my work. It influences how I lead my team. And it actually influences my own personal growth and development. I'm not afraid to try new things because I'm used to experimenting and trying some things out. I love a good PDCA cycle.
Thank you, Rosalind. And I noticed that you and a lot of the other people in the room have mentioned communication and building relationships, and the human element a lot. And I think as we think of healthcare leaders, we often think of a lot of these hard skills or the clinical skills as what's running the hospital. But what I'm hearing that is, in addition to those things, what is most come up in this conversation has maybe been some of those softer skills, communication strategy. What what of these non-clinical skills do you think has been the most essential to success as a leader, and how did you develop them? And I will kick that out to kind of the entire group and see what are your thoughts around these non-clinical skills? Which ones have you used the most, and how did you go about developing them? I just let you chime in on whoever wants to answer it.
I'll kick us off. I think one of them for me is preparing to pivot, being prepared to pivot, being prepared to change and adapting to change. And I think my clinical work helped with that because you're always having to change or pivot based on what is happening in the current situation. So just being flexible and ready and prepared for the pivot. So I think that's one thing for me. So when I completed the master's in Master of Science in Healthcare Management program, going through SWOT analysis, Porter's 5, forces, just understanding that cheese moves and you need to be prepared for the cheese to move, understanding what disruption is all about. I think those are things that I keep in the forefront in addition to my clinical experience. That helps me to remain flexible. It helps me to be forward thinking and anticipate what I might need to do and how I might need to change what I'm doing.
Yeah, Rosalind, I heard you mention like flexibility, and I think that that can also tie into how, out of a couple skills, I'd say like active listening has been a key one for me with my first foray into, you know, really just leading people and leading a high performing team. And I think a story I can share with you guys is during one of my weekly team huddles, we were rolling out a new process to like a standard work document that had been developed out for years. And I had noticed just some overall like hesitation from the team. And so instead of just pushing the change forward and saying, yep, this is happening, this is how it's going to be, I took a second to pause and just ask the team to just share their concerns over this particular process change. Again, just listening carefully, not just to what was being said, but what wasn't being said. And I think just taking the time to explain the why behind that particular change ultimately fostered more trust and ultimately more buy-in to the change. It wasn't just, oh, Elizabeth saying something, we're going to do it. It's okay, here's how it connects not only to how can continue to do our work more effectively, but most importantly, how we can continue to impact patient outcomes, like at the end of the day. And I think that it was just a continued reminder to show how people can support what they help create, and just taking that opportunity to listen is huge. Another, I'd say, just example I can share with you guys of a key non-clinical skill is executive presence. And so for one of those, this was back in my administrative fellow days, but I was invited to sit in on some grant proposal presentations for our Community Health Impact Initiative, which is ultimately where different grassroots organizations come in and present to our senior leaders and community partners in a room. And it's a pretty high stakes environment. And so for me, I chose to listen again and lead by listening, just taking in each proposal, again, actively acknowledging that I'm not a decision maker, just really seeing how different senior leaders ask strategic questions and overall observing the dynamics in the room. And of course, as an early careerist, you think, okay, if I'm not asking a ton of questions or jumping in, like, what are folks going to think, right? But the next day, I ended up receiving an unexpected email from one of our chief operating officers, and it simply said, keep it up. Sometimes the best leadership is quiet leadership. And I think that really stuck with me because it reminded me, and of course can share with you guys, that sometimes being present isn't always about speaking the most. It's about showing up with that intentionality and staying grounded.
I love this example because I think executive presence is one of those things that we don't often talk about, but is absolutely a skill set on its own, as well as active listening. Like we all like to think that we're amazing listeners, but it is a skill, and it's something that takes practice and has theory. So I love that. Erin or Natalie, anything to add around what non-clinical skills are showing up the most for you?
Oh, go ahead, Erin.
Oh yeah, no, I would expand on that, and I think being flexible, definitely, right. There's so many things in healthcare that we are reacting to, right, that we don't choose, and we think, okay, I know we did this yesterday. We're literally regrouping and completely changing course today, and so I think executive presence, I would agree, but for me, a lot of times what that means is, in this chaotic moment when you think, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Like keeping that game face on, because everybody's looking to you as a leader to see how are you reacting, right? And it doesn't mean that it's always, you have to say it's going to be okay, but they want some reassurance that we've got this, right? Or we'll get through it, or hey, we've solved things that are just as hard, and right. So I think in that moment, having the right words or the right composure to keep a room full of people from completely falling apart. I mean, and I think it's something that happened as recent as Friday, right? And then that's, literally you're looking at you. And I said, hey, we'll figure this out, right? It's hard. And when we get on the other side of it, we're better for it. We've learned, and we're going to put our heads together. And so, it was late Friday evening. I said, take the weekend, clear your minds. We'll regroup today. And came in and, started digging in, and already, right, ideas are flowing, and just keeping that positive outlook, because things are hard, right? And especially when it's healthcare, right? There are some hard and scary things, but you got to stay in the moment. You got to stay focused and not get, drawn into the chaos. And so I think as a leader, that's our job for sure.
Yeah, and I
I love
echo,
that, Erin.
yeah, I echo what everyone, all Rosalind, Erin, and Elizabeth have shared. Really, it's the active listening, being adaptable. Communication is key, presenting to different leaders and clinicians, non-clinicians, just making sure, how much, I've learned a lot on how much tone, clarity, and timing matters when you communicate changes, especially. And emotional intelligence that Erin really highlighted when you're leading a team, especially during those times of change. Just how you show up really matters. I've worked on this through mentorship coaching, and I'm still working on this. I'm not perfect. And honestly, it's all through trial and error, just being able to listen, de-escalate tension, and make space for others to share has helped me build that trust and lead more effectively.
So I think this goes really naturally into healthcare is absolutely undergoing unprecedented change right now, whether it's technology, workforce dynamics, right? Our workforce is getting smaller. We're asking them to do more. We're asking them to have skills that they previously maybe haven't have had. We're promoting clinical leaders, maybe without strong leadership development. We're asking them to learn new skills when they're already overwhelmed and burned out. Reimbursement is changing, policy is changing, like healthcare in general, whether you're in a hospital or medical device or pharma, is all undergoing rapid change right now. So how have you guys approached change management in your leadership roles, right? There are multiple change management theoretical frameworks, and how they apply is every department applies them differently, every leader applies them differently. So tell me about how in your leadership role, like what strategies have you used to really help guide these teams, right? So we've heard tone and making sure that they know that you've got them. What are some other things that you've done to help manage this chaos and change right now that's happening in healthcare?
That's a good question. I feel like healthcare today is like a perpetual like beta testing. Um, it's changing constantly. I mean, I can speak from my point of view. I focus on a lot on like frontline readiness, because we're the ones having to adapt to that change right away as clinicians. For example, I have two examples transitioning from like a new charting system, Epic, or the biggest one was transitioning my team to a fully remote hybrid model due to staffing challenges. And that was something that was not accepted at first. So from frontline readiness, I would say just making sure my team had the tools, the workflows, and the support to adapt without being burnt out. I think burnout is the biggest thing with change. So that's something we're still learning. And I think it's really important that your team is aware of the changes that are happening and are prepared for it. Whether it's developing tip sheets, develop peer trainings, huddles, frequently one-on-one meetings, Q&A support, whatever it is, it's important that you're constantly communicating and preparing your team for change, especially when we had those long-term staffing gaps. At my hospital, I work for Mercy One North Iowa Medical Center. We're a rural hospital. We don't have a lot of attraction for clinicians to come and work there. So our team, we had a high turnover, and we just couldn't hire any on-site dietitians for over 8 months. So senior leadership were like, well, let's hire remote. It was a big change, especially for our older staff. How can we provide inpatient care virtually? We have a virtual nursing program. How are we going to do this for our dietitian? A huge change. But there was a lot of hesitancy. Staff weren't sure how it would work, and it felt very unfamiliar. That's the thing with change. It doesn't feel familiar. So I followed my own like plan. Let's plan this. Let's pilot this change, bring some remote dietitians, and see how we can sustain it, because that's what we're going through right now. So working really closely with the team is, and just understanding what is needed is important.
I would say for our team, there's a couple of things. First of all, just, really spending time before you at the start to understand each team, because part of change management, but one part that's really hard is that as you're moving towards a goal, people have conflicting reasons, or way, like some of the goals, if someone wants to be productive, but that means for somebody else that it's conflicting with their goal of being whatever their daily goal is. And so understanding why, right? What's important to each department or leader, and how does that tie into the overall goal? But also understanding too that as you move down that path, there's going to be sacrifices, right? We're not going to be able to make everybody completely happy, but so I think you have to tie into where are we going, how does it impact each piece or each department, and then if people are buying into that ultimate goal, right? If we're getting, here's an example for our hospital is, we're on this great path to sustainability. And so getting there are pieces that everybody owns, each department. But in that, there are also pieces that we have to give up or say, hey, we're putting that on hold. But if it means for the greater good that we are an organization that's here long term, that can give their employees increases, that, offers competitive benefits, that can, we're getting staff because people want to work here, right? That's good for everybody. So I think making sure that people understand, why is this important, and they're not the only ones sacrificing. So while there might be one-off meetings, bringing the whole team together to talk about, hey, this is what everybody's giving up, and talking through those frustrations, right? And being able to kind of have a little bit of a vent session, right? Going below the line for a little bit, then coming back up, and then working towards that end goal. And then the other piece, right? I mean, people are afraid, there's a lot of fear in change, right? And you've done the same thing a certain way for so long. And so understanding the fear. And again, right, is it loss of control? Is it that we've done it this way so long, I don't know how to be different? And so understanding what that fear is, and it may vary, and helping people solve for that. And sometimes it's really personal. So you have to be willing to really take that one off and say, hey, what's going on? Let's sit down, talk about it. But in those moments too, that's when you learn the most about the people that you're leading, and you build this trust, right? That you now know, and we're gonna get through this, and it's you and I, and we get to the other side, and right, that's somebody that you just build a really strong connection with. So hard moments, but also really huge opportunities to connect with your team during that time.
I really like that it can be really personal, right? Because when you're part of an organization, taking care of the patients is really personal. If you're on the administrative side, a lot of those workflows were built by those people, right? So when you're dismantling something that's been in place that was someone's baby, like it is, sometimes their professional identities can be tied to the work that they're doing and how it's done. So managing through that. And I really liked what you said also about acknowledging that not only what one group is giving up, but that multiple groups are giving things up, and that there will be sacrifices made, and the why of, in the end, this is going to provide a better experience for you or your patients, or I think that that's really powerful. How do you guys go about kind of balancing the different stakeholder priorities, right? Because you mentioned that not everybody's going to have the same goal, or not everybody's going to want the same thing, and you're absolutely right. Not everybody is going to get exactly what they want out of any change or process. So why don't we talk about how do you manage that, and what do those conversations look on the back end when people want wildly different things from a new process or procedure or from a change?
I know
Please jump in. I don't have anybody specific for that.
Yeah, I know for our team, we really start with the, where do we want to be? What's the end result? What's that look like? And then backing backing down, right? And as you back, into where are we starting, that you go through all the things that need to happen to get to that end result. And there can be, some different ways, but in that, then you create these buckets or priorities, right? And so as you meet with each team and decide what's important or what they're giving up or what they don't want to give up, right? Part of that discussion is, does it fall into this one of these buckets? And if it does, is it the ultimate priority? Is it a nice to have, but hey, it could happen without it? And that's really where that buy-in comes in, right? It's not a never. Sometimes the discussion becomes like, for us with the sustainability discussion, that's why we're trying to get there, so we can do these things, but it's not vital to us being here. We're trying to make sure we're here long-term to serve the community right now, and that we want to do these things. And when we get there, right, hopefully 12 months from now, then we get to apply it to this bucket. So just making sure they understand where those pieces fall, and if it's a detractor from getting us to the overall good, they need to understand why. But then where does it go, right? If it's not now, when and why, and what does it depend on? What does your team own? What pieces do you own, down to the very, your frontline employees? How do they impact that? So they know that, okay, we're working towards this, so later we can do these things that are important to us. So I think just making sure that people understand where it is in the big picture and how it ties to the goal or doesn't. And if it's longer term, being very open about that.
Yeah, Erin, I like that. Like sometimes no can mean like not yet as well. And I think that for me, similar to like what Erin shared, like putting together like a charter of some kind can also be helpful, like when you're just balancing different like stakeholder priorities, as it keeps that North Star, I would say top of mind. As again, some things are just do it, get her done. Other times it's okay, we can do it. However, here are all of these different steps that would be necessary to be able to accomplish it. Others may take more time. And then, of course, that like fourth bucket being, hopefully not at this time, but something that we can pursue like in the future.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So when we're talking about building these teams together, that could have a lot of, we've got these managing the stakeholder priorities, as well as just teams that are made up from a bunch of different groups, right? And those could be different areas in the hospital. They could be different backgrounds. How do you approach building these cross-functional teams? And then how do you manage them when you have people with such different backgrounds who have different languages, different terms, right? We love acronyms in hospitals, so not everybody might even know what we're talking about in the room. How do you as leaders go about managing people who come from such different backgrounds?
One of the things that I use is the SIPOC tool. I'm actually a fan of SIPOC, and that's that framework that's used to identify your steps in the process, the suppliers and customers of the process, as well as what they contribute or gain from the process. And I think that's a great starting point. And what that has helped me do is make sure I have the right people at the table, the right perspectives, voices, subject matter experts, and that I'm not leaving anyone out. And that's what I think is the great benefit of using a SIPOC. And I've done that both informally and formally with the SIPOC. And so once I understand who needs to be at the table, what voices need to be heard, what areas of functions need to be represented, bringing that group of individuals or representatives together and really explaining what you're trying to do, making it very clear what your goal or your purpose is, and allowing that collaborative opportunity for people to chime in on what that approach or strategy might be. And when you do that and people's voices are heard, they tend to buy in. And so going back to what you were saying about what we were just talking about with that managing stakeholders and different priorities, when you get a cross-functional group together and they understand where you're headed and where you're going, and they are allowed to provide some input in that new process or initiative or change, you get further down the road. And there's that collaboration and there's an understanding usually of prioritization. And so that's what I've done in the past. Made sure I was clear on roles and responsibilities related to process improvements or initiatives that we were embarking upon.
I love that, in creating buy-in because everyone feels like they have a voice, right? So when you include the people who are doing the work in the process of changing the work, then it has a huge impact on their buy-in, on their engagement. I love everything about that. Other additional thoughts around kind of building and managing cross-functional teams? She did a really great job on answering that one. So the next, a lot of the questions that I've seen in the chat were around advice for new leaders or leaders who are mid-career who are wanting to maybe take on some additional responsibilities, and what kinds of things should they be listed, like what sort of things should they be looking at, to what skills they should look at, or what things they should do to help develop skills. So I'm going to list off a few things that I heard today. So I've heard trust as a skill, creating standard work and standard operating procedures. I've heard SIPOC in identifying who needs to be part of a team. I've heard data analytics. I've heard Power BI dashboards. I've heard executive presence. I've heard trust, emotional intelligence, team building, process improvement, and change management. And that's a lot of different skills for someone to learn. So can you tell me about what continuing education or professional development, or even blogs or podcasts or newsletters that you're engaging with that helps with your leadership development and growth, right? So what is it that you've engaged with to make sure that you're building your skills and that you continue to stay up on those skills?
For me, I think initially, obviously get going and getting my master's in healthcare management was a piece of it. But the other side of it was then, how do you convince people that you've already been working with every day that you're different, right? You're ready. And so I remember having this conversation with my CEO, and he said, look at my calendar and you look at all the meetings that I'm in and tell me where I can start plugging you in. He said, I want you to spend a couple months just plugging yourself in. And then once you plug yourself in, I want you to come back to me with a couple of ideas of projects that you think you could lead. And and he said, and because you have to have a reason to be there, right? It's more than just being there. And so, and he said, proving yourself, showing the team that you can lead in a different way and you're not just HR. And so that was good and scary at the same time, right? When I remember coming in and leading the first project, I know there were some people that were like, why are you doing this? What are you doing? But you go in, it was successful. I led the way I always lead, right? Just in a different type of project, asking for feedback, building trust, the same things they liked about me when I was HR. Right now I'm in this new space. And when they see you lead there, and then they're connecting, it was good. And so now, I find myself in lots of non-typical HR projects as I'm branching out and doing a lot of new things and growing into that space. But I think at first you just, you have to jump in, right? And so I remember asking him, I said, what if the first project I lead is a failure? And he said, a lot of projects here fail, right? He said, and those are people that work in that space all the time. So, I think you have to be okay with failing and then using that, right, to learn and continuously asking for feedback. How did I do? What could I do better? How can I support you? And then again, just going in and making sure that you understand their business, right? That you earn so much from a partner if you go in and you've spent the time and you understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. You know their staff, you already know their opportunities because you've seen them play out and you were in their department. So that goes a long way.
And I love that you said that, because jumping in and taking advantage of some opportunities or leading the way is certainly important. And I think it was the pivotal moment for me. I think in addition to that, we've all talked about mentorship. And so I think finding a good mentor is so key. And we probably have all experienced that on our leadership journey. So finding a good mentor is something important, but also determining what education, certifications, what do you need to do how do you immerse yourself in the content that is needed for you to develop in the area or the field or develop a skill. I think that's important as well. And you ask about podcasts and books. There's so many different opportunities, but I really do appreciate Lencioni. I listened to the At the Table podcast, and it's really good. Dare to Lead, Advantage, the book Advantage, From Good to Great, just so many different opportunities out there now.
I want to share one book that I did read when I started my position. It was really good. And I learned this from my master's program. I had to reread it. It's the first 90 Days by Michael Watkins. I highly recommend that one.
Yeah, I think really all of those are spot on. I think the only other thing I would chime in on is regardless as to which stage you are at in your career, also getting involved in any types of professional organizations that are in your area. ACHE, of course, is one. I know several of you on the call are a part of, like the National Association of Health Services Executives, as am I, for the like Indianapolis chapter. I think that those are also, board involvement, right? I think that all of those are key ways to also gain not only like tangible but transferable skills that you may not have like see all the time like in your day to day. And those are all key things to say, okay, although I'm not doing it in my day to day, here's how I leveraged finance, right? And putting together like this type of event for like a board I'm involved in. I know that that was something that I wanted to be like more involved with, is understanding those types of things, right? So all of those are ways in which you can, not only build those transferable skills, but also build relationships, with your peers, both like within and outside of organizations that you're involved with.
I love everything about that, right? It's the peer networks, because when you get to a certain stage in your career, it's who you know and who you're pulling on and how you've worked with them. I think that that's fantastic. And I know that early in my career, at the time I worked for IU Health, and their C-suite had like a monthly book club. And my boss then just passed down what book they were reading every month. And then I started reading that book. And those books like was The Advantage, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Humble Inquiry. Like, it's interesting how many of those books are showing up even in this conversation right now, and the relationships are absolutely, at some point, it's pulling on the people you know to support you. So getting involved in those professional societies makes a big difference. And I know that a lot of them, like, so Natalie, you mentioned like Power BI earlier, so finding some of those dashboard skills as well. I think we used to say that, when we were in leadership teams, there was a data guy, but the data guy doesn't like exist anymore, right? Like, we all have to understand what data is, what makes quality data, how to display it, how we're reviewing it, right? And I say guy within like a gender neutral space, but now as leaders, we need to know how to make dashboards and what that looks like. And so I love kind of this list. As we are looking at, this room is full of current leaders, future leaders, and execs. What advice would you give to someone who wants to move into leadership but doesn't feel ready yet? So where should they start? So we've had some discussions around finding a mentor and skilling up. What other advice would you give to someone that's like, hey, I'm brand new in my organization and I want someone to notice me, or I'm not in ops yet, but I really want to be an ops? Or what are those things that you would give for someone that really wants, that they're at the beginning of their journey?
I guess from the HR perspective, I think that's a great discussion to have with your manager. And maybe not every manager, I guess it depends on the role. But during a touch base or a performance review, right, to talk about, hey, I love where I'm at. This is a great spot for me to learn a lot. can we talk about where I want to go or where you best see me, as far as a fit for this organization? Now, sometimes, they're not, every manager's not open to that conversation, or maybe a little bit taken back by somebody who's new, right? And they think they're not ready. So I always invite people to find somebody else. And right, it doesn't have to be HR, but I know myself, though, I'm always looking for somebody who wants to grow. Because find somebody that wants to stay long term and really be embedded in the organization. That's what we're all looking for. And so I think from my perspective, one of the best things that happens is we have a role posted and somebody posts and someone says, well, they were great, but they're just not ready yet. Okay, right. But here's somebody who's telling us they want to do it. And so I think those are great opportunities. And so I think the reverse side of that is, how do we find out those people, right, that aren't ready yet, and having the conversations and making sure that we know the people that want to break into something different? Because often you'll find out that someone, they apply and they start in registration, but their ultimate goal is to, work as the director over our emergency department. And so, okay, sign me up. How do we get you there? What's that path look like? Because it probably starts now. And just making sure that we're always asking and having the conversation.
Yeah, I think, Erin, to piggyback off of what you shared too, one thing I think that helped me that might help out, like those that might be like, don't feel like ready just yet for leadership, is creating like a 5 and 10+ year plan, I would say. So thinking about, okay, I'm at point A, like in my career, and I, like Erin said, I want to get to this next step. In your current role, right, what are things that you can focus on, maybe in partnership with that manager or a mentor or what have you, that can help with more of those tangible skills? Thinking about like a 70-20-10 model, what are experiences that you could do? So taking time to go out and shadow a different, team, or shadow a different process, and seeing how other, different leaders do their day to day, right? And then, in that 10%, what are or who are people that you can get in contact with, build those relationships with, and hey, they might become your mentor or your sponsor in the future for a role that you're wanting to step into. And meeting with them and seeing what is top of mind for them as well. And like we had shared previously, in those relationship buildings, right? How can you get involved in like those items that they also might be a part of to get you ready for that next step?
Yeah, I love what you've shared too. And one of the other things that cross my mind is thinking about where you potentially want to go. And I know sometimes that can be hard. You might not know exactly what you want, what even the potential is, or what even is out there. So I love the thought of having those conversations with mentors and your manager. But if you know where you potentially want to go, finding someone who's in that role and spending time with that person, researching job descriptions related to that role, and then assessing I'm going back to my clinical and scientific background, assessing where you are in current state and then where you want to be in future state based on that job description, identifying some gaps to get you there. And then that way you can go to a leader or a mentor and say, hey, here are some gaps that I have on that journey or that path that I want to be on, and can you help me develop or close those gaps? I think would be another way to just try a transition and get yourself prepared for leadership.
Yeah, I echo what everyone said. Really on point. Yeah, I would just say, ask. And I reached out to a mentor. I had a mentor. My mentor is a fellow from ACHE in an aspiring position I want to be in 5 years' time, and just coaching and mentorship. And like, how did you end up where you ended up now? And learning from her and what I should be doing. So, it doesn't, growth never ends. And if in your current role, volunteer, ask to be involved in projects as much as you can, and always ask a seasoned leader from a different department if there's something you can be involved with, ask for feedback, and document every lesson you've learned and all your wins. Even small, those visible wins can build the confidence and those lines you can add in your CV you think you're missing.
Okay, for our final question, I'm going to do a two-parter. Is looking back, what do you wish you had known earlier in your leadership journey? And I want to do it in a two-part, which I'm springing on my panel. So know that I'm springing something new. What do you wish that you would have known as an early leader? And what do you wish your leader would have known for you as an early leader? So if you could have gone back to your first like entry level and said, hey, leader, like this would have been really helpful. And hey, me, this would have been really helpful. What do you wish you would have known? And what do you wish your leaders would have known or done to help support you as an early leader? Because we've got a variety of people here in the room. So I want to make sure that we're being helpful to both. So what do you wish you would have known? What do you wish your leader would have known?
I can try and chime in here. I would say nothing, you can't do everything perfectly. I feel like perfection slows you down. Don't go into the nitty-gritty and the details, do what you can, especially in healthcare when we were talking about everything is changing every day. So I feel like leadership in a way is a series of like small experiments. You just trial, learn from it, and you change and adjust.
I know this has been mentioned several times, but I don't think it can be overstated. I wish I had known the value and importance of connecting with a mentor. I didn't get a mentor until later in my career, and I really feel that things would have changed or my path might have been different if I had a mentor and a sponsor early in my career. So I had several leaders recognize potential that I had, and I, sometimes was stuck in positions. However, had I had a mentor, I could have had some of those conversations early on in my career that would have helped develop me. And I, I think if I could change anything, I would have pursued a graduate degree in business or healthcare management or healthcare administration earlier in my career. So I found the graduate study while I had a graduate degree in occupational therapy, the one in business that was more recent would have been extremely valuable for me many years ago.
Yeah, I think thinking about both of those questions, I think a quote kind of comes to mind for me in my career is that sometimes rejection can just be redirection. I think no matter what in your career, there's always going to be times where you get a no, whether you are pursuing something in a project or you're pursuing a role and it might not turn out the exact same way that you originally anticipated, of course. And I think just looking back on my career and where I'd like to go, I think it's always something to keep in mind that it's not that you're not worthy of a role or not worthy of like achieving something exactly how you think. It's more so just redirection towards something that actually sees you for your potential and ultimately you'll get more out of it because you didn't get that initial yes. So no matter what stage you're at in your career, embracing that failure, studying it, seeing, okay, what could I have done better? Ultimately what happened? And then grow from it. If anything, it's a teaching moment to say, okay, tried something one time, let's do something different here. And ultimately, you'll benefit both personally and professionally as you continue on in your career.
I think for me, I would, with what you said, Rosalind, really resonates. I think having, going into HR, that was, I had a starting point, but I think it really helps any leader to have that general business background and the acumen to be able to not just have a seat at the table, but to understand and contribute and really when you look at the pieces of, each department, the data and all the things that I need to go in and, no matter what point I'm driving, right, I need those pieces are all important. So, whether it's finance or data, I'm pulling that all in to tell the story. So I think having that early on is very valuable. It helps you, again, to convey your points or to build the case. I think the other piece that I wish I would have learned early on, I had this mindset, this leader had to be this person that you never see their personal side, or they never experience anything, right? So I talked about having your game face and being, strong for your team, but they also want to see a real person, right? And so everybody has life happening. And I think it's okay sometimes to let people see that, because it helps them relate. And, we're all going through something at some point. And so I think being relatable and approachable and being real, but also being able then to say, but in the midst of that, right, we're leaders and we have to do these things. And so I think there's a mix, but being real and letting people know that, hey, we're the same, right? And so we're in this together. We are working on hard stuff, even when hard stuff's happening outside of work.
This is amazing. I love all of these answers. Before I transition to question and answer, is there anything important that I haven't asked, or things that you think are important to share with a group who's interested in navigating in healthcare to move into leadership roles? I had a pretty good question set and we've had a pretty good discussion, but I didn't want to close it without asking. Good. Okay, then I will open up to the group. And so I went through and tried to review the questions that have been submitted so far. What is it that we haven't covered, or what additional questions do you have for our esteemed panel today?
Hi, this is Max Prosto with IU Health. So there was a large discussion on mentorship, right? So my question to the group is, how does one go about, I guess, submitting that ask to a potential mentor, right? So I know there was different avenues to maybe potentially find one, such as through professional organizations, through school, things like that. But what would the, I guess, formal ask look like to a potential person who could be a mentor, if that makes sense?
Thoughts from the panel or the group at large? So we have a large number of people in here who probably have served as both mentees and mentors. So what are your experiences both in the panel as a group of navigating a successful mentee-mentor relationship?
I can say something here. One thing that has been one of the things that I have done, and that maybe would be a good recommendation, is again speaking with your manager about recommendations for mentors. I know that once your leader sees your potential and understands your desired career path, they might have people in mind that would be great leaders or mentors, I'm sorry, for you that you might not be aware of. And so I think that's one thing. And I know as a leader, I've done that for people on my team. Once I recognize potential, I understand their individual development plan and where they're going, then I can make some suggestions like you might want to connect with this person. And then I've made that connection, initial contact for them. But I've also been on the other side where I've just reached out and said, here, here's a little bit about me and where I'm headed, and really admire you and your leadership style and where you are, and was wondering if you would mind being a mentor for me. And so I've just reached out and asked.
I think in that situation too, sometimes people think, oh, well, I have not been a mentor before. And so I think coming with an idea of what that means to you, right? But what would that look like? How can you best support me? And then offering up, what would that look like weekly, or what am I asking of you? And so I think when you define it, so really I'm just talking, we're spending time, you're giving me feedback. And when you simplify it, I think that, a lot of people are like, oh, I could be a mentor, but hadn't thought of themselves in that light before.
Others in the room, anything that has worked really well for you as a mentor or a mentee? Um, Looks like we have a chat that says Copilot can start a great email template if you plug in some information about yourself and why you think the person you're reaching out to could be a mentor, then edit as appropriate. I'm a huge fan of generative AI and using it to make things as clear as possible and as quick as possible. So I think that that's a great suggestion. And to Erin's point, being very clear about the ask up front, how many hours a week, making sure that you're sending an agenda ahead of time. I had one mentee who would show up and had nothing to talk about. And then we just sat there for like 10 minutes because it was my first time being a mentor and I didn't know what she needed. And it was her first time being a mentee and she didn't know what she needed. So we ended up just kind of looking at each other for a while. So being very clear around kind of taking some of those Rosalind's suggestions on what job descriptions are you looking at and what skills, and asking them what skills they use and asking them to connect you and having very clear asks on the front end, I think can be really helpful. Any other things that you guys have done as a mentor or mentee that's been helpful? Let's hear from a mentor. I know we've got some in the room. Give me a hands up. Who has been a mentor before? No? No? Okay. Other questions? How can we best be of use and support to you? Tracy said, excellent presentation and leadership stories. Thank you, Tracy. Other questions, comments, concerns, things you'd like to chat about in a room full of leaders while you have us for the next 4 minutes? Are there any skills that anyone is looking to develop or is on your list of maybe I should be looking into this, not sure if it's helpful or not? Mhm. I know I've been going down the AI rabbit hole lately of all the things that AI can do and what can it automate and how can it make my life easier and what does that mean in the healthcare space? Anybody else gone down the AI rabbit hole lately? There was Jeff. Oh, I did not prep. Jeff someone, that's not helpful at all, did an AI and leadership book that has like changed my life. Hold on. He has a whole like AI leader collective and is using AI in strategy in ways that I had never thought possible. Like book completely blew my mind. I'm going to see if I can do a quick Google search because this one has been. I've also been reading Who Not What recently, looking at how do we maximize our teams and making sure that everybody is working at top of license, not just from a clinical perspective, but from an admin perspective as well. We taught what specific project management skills we talk about a SIPOC would be good to learn and implement in a daily and weekly practice. What project management skills do you guys use? I will general kick that one out to anybody who will answer.
There are several that I've used. One from the MSHM program, we use the Franklin Covey 7 Habits project management certification. That was really helpful. What else? ADKAR. I use that a lot. Lean Six Sigma, A3 thinking. All of those are great skills.
We're actually using Lean right now for a project in our surgery department as we look at how we schedule our team and making sure that we are using ways that make sense. But also, I mean, this is, you know, pretty common sense, but I think something we forget, just making sure we're reaching out to peer in our peer hospitals. You know, what are you guys doing? How do you do it? Here's what we're facing. Have you been through this before? How would you approach it? And so so many times I go back to that's where we find our answer and hearing from other people that are facing the same problems or have already solved for it. So that's always successful too.
What a great nugget, Erin. I think sometimes we forget that. We don't have to always reinvent the wheel. We can borrow and learn from others who've already done that. And Natalie, I use some of those same tools on a regular basis, project charters, A3 thinking or DMAIC thinking. I use that on a regular basis. Voice of the customer, listening to the frontline staff or the customers who actually have the problems that you want to solve, spending time with them so that you understand what is actually happening and understanding what the root cause might be. Data analysis tools are key in the work that we do as well.
Okay, I think we are about out of time. Would everyone join me in giving our panelists a round of applause? Literally from kindergarten, the round, right? And oops. I will say that outside of the MSHM program, my training company has had a lot of requests lately for like a white belt or a yellow belt in DMAIC. So when looking at those project management tools, I think a lot of hospitals are kind of moving to that DMAIC format. I will also shamelessly plug the Master of Science in Healthcare Management degree program. So if you're looking to get that master's in business, we offer the best of both worlds. We're a program that's both the Kelley School of Business and the O'Neill School, two amazing schools, one degree program. Can be done online in 1 year. So if you're interested in that, please look me up and send me a shout out. Corey, thank you so much for having us in this wonderful panel here to share our journeys and talk a little bit about healthcare leadership.
Thank you, April. And thank you again to the MSHM program in Bloomington for sponsoring this event. Speaking of events, we have several opportunities for credits for our members. So ACHE of Indiana will be at the HEPE Summit on this Thursday, July 17th. There is still time to register, but I believe today might be the last day. You can use the promo code GUEST2025 for a complimentary registration and earn 3 in-person credits. ISHRA will be working with the Indiana Hospital Association for their 2nd annual Workforce Summit Solution on August 21st. SHRM credits will be available and hopefully eventually non-officially yet some ACHE credits as well. And then ACHE of Indiana is hosting their first ever one-day summit. That will be on September 18th, and we will have 6 in-person credits at that event. Again, thank you to all of ACHE of Indiana's annual sponsors, as well as ISHRA's annual sponsors for also helping make events like this possible. And I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Nan.
Great. Thanks so much, Corey. Yes, on behalf of ACHE, the chapter, our moderator and panelists, thank you for your participation for an outstanding session. It was great. If you want to watch it again, you'll be able to in about 2 business days. So remember that recording will be available where you see your learning management system courses for ACHE and your interactive, virtual interactive education credit takes a little longer, but it should be there in about 10 days, if not sooner. Keep your eyes out in the same place where the courses are for your online learning with ACHE. I'm going to go ahead because there's so many thank yous being put into that chat. go ahead and give that evaluation link one more time. But that does conclude our session, which is copyrighted in 2025 by the American College of Healthcare Executives. All rights are reserved. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.